Welcome to Seminar 2. Please pause the video and write down all of Rosenstein's principles that you can remember. Even better, can you number them? Okay, here's the answers. Please review the notes that you've made and score yourself if you feel that would be helpful. Okay, so this is our second seminar. It's going to have a focus on planning, and as it's the ITAP 2, we are going to look at analysing some planning in this session. So let's look ahead at the objectives for today's seminar. We are going to analyse examples of begin with the end and refine your own planning of this. You should have already completed some planning work for that during your pre-work or during self-directed study. You are also going to analyse some examples of how to introduce new concepts using dual coding and some concrete examples, and again have some time to refine your own planning. We'll analyse a live model of an I do, and again get an opportunity to look at your own planning. Unfortunately, as you are watching a recording, you will not be able to connect with your peers on the programme this time. So the structure for for today's seminar is through 3 different analysis activities. So let's get started with the first one, and we'll reflect on Rosenstein's principles. So in your self-directed content, you looked at the importance of the beginning with the end when planning. It can be very tempting to start with what you want the pupils to be doing during the lesson. This approach can be problematic if you are thinking of the activities first and not always considering how those activities connect the learning we want the pupils to understand. The starting point therefore, should always be, what do we want the pupils to know? What do we want them to be able to do by the end of the lesson? That could be what something they're going to understand, be able to demonstrate, depending on our subject. And then we work back from there. This is also sometimes known as the backwards planning method. When beginning with the end, we can follow this process. So we should set the objective, identifying what it is we want the pupils to be able to do by the end of the lesson. Then we should decide on how we are going to assess that they have done that successfully. How will we know the pupils have learned or can do what we have intended for them to learn? And how will you assess this throughout the lesson? Moving then into actually planning the activities that will engage the pupils to develop their understanding of the intended content. Let's look some more at setting these objectives. When you know what you want pupils to learn in the lesson, it's important to then carefully craft these into learning objectives. And during your self-directed study, you looked at the 4 M's for making effective lesson objectives. Take a minute. Can you think of what these are? So firstly, an objective should be manageable. You should always consider whether it is possible to achieve that objective in the time pupils are given. It should also be measurable. Can you measure it? Can you assess that the pupils have gained the knowledge or the skill in relation to the objective that you have set? It should then be made first, as we've already said, before you start planning your activities. Most important, does the objective include the most important information? And is it going to explain to the pupils what they are learning in that lesson? So now let's have a little look at some lesson objective and consider it against these 4 criteria. Make predictions about a text. Can we see the objective? We can see that this objective doesn't meet the 4 criteria. It's not manageable. Make inference about a text is too broad and can't be achieved within the time frame of the lesson. It's not measurable again, as it is too vague and you wouldn't be able to assess progress against it. It may be made first, but as it is so broad, it would be difficult for you to design activities that clearly support pupils in learning enough to meet the objective set. Some of the most important information does appear, but some is also missing. Instead, we could rewrite this to predict what happens next in the text by using 2 or 3 pieces of textual information. This is specific and allows the pupils to understand clearly what is expected of them, so that and clearly for you to assess that they have achieved it and praise pupils accordingly. In the live session, trainees were going to have an opportunity at this stage of the seminar to go into breakout spaces and receive feedback on the begin with the end planning that they had done in their self-directed study. As this is a recording, unfortunately that it isn't going to be possible. So please do speak to your PDL to receive some relevant feedback around the work that you have done in your self-directed study. Okay, moving on to activity 2. You learnt in your self-directed work that when too much is being done by the working memory, it gets overloaded. When we experience cognitive overload, we can experience frustration and anxiety. This is due to the release of a cortisol which inhibits learning further, and this produces an unhelpful spiral. One way that as a teacher you can support your pupils in avoiding cognitive overload is to present new information in small steps. This will also support you as a novice teacher, not trying to remember everything all in one go. Rosenshine reminds us to do this in his Principles of Instruction. Teachers may also try to support appropriate cognitive load when presenting new information by using concrete examples and dual coding. So let's look at an example from a geography lesson. The objective might be for all pupils to know and be able to explain in their own words 5 stages of waterfall formation. After the do now, which may or not be connected to the subject of today's lesson, the teacher will introduce the new content. A teacher might write out on a PowerPoint slide and explain how a waterfall is formed and then describe to the pupil. For example, let's have a look at the example that's in front of us. Waterfalls often form in the upper stages of a river, where the river flows over different bands of rock. The flowing water erodes the soft rock more quickly than the hard rock, undercutting the hard rock. The hard rock is left overhanging, and because it is overhanging, eventually collapses. The fallen rock crashes into a plunge pool and the water causes them to swirl around, further eroding the soft rock, causing more erosion. Over time, this process is repeated and the waterfall moves upstream. Now, let's have a look and see how we could improve this by using some dual coding to make the instructions and the introduction of new material more manageable for our pupils to understand. So this time, the teacher has remembered to introduce the information in small steps and link the steps to a visual aid to reduce cognitive load. The teacher might create a slide that looks like this and then use the animation function, for example, to allow each stage to be appearing on the screen one at a time. And they might script what they're going to say to ensure that the information is clear and concise for the pupils. So you can see here that we've got number 1, waterfalls often form in upper stages of the river, and there is an image to describe it, and as forth with the next 4 stages. This is more effective as it allows pupils to associate each step, have an understanding that there are 5 different steps, and have a visual aid to support them. It's simple, it explains the concept that is trying to be taught, and by revealing each number alongside the diagram, it allows them to break down the concept into small, achievable chunks that are manageable for the students to learn. And like the first example, where there was so much text, it was hard for the pupils to decipher each different piece of information. So when providing new information, it is really important to also try and provide concrete examples for pupils so that they can connect that new complex or abstract information to something concrete that they are already familiar with. For example, if explaining an abstract maths concept, for example, if I just say addition is the process of adding 2 or more numbers or amounts together to find the total, this could confuse some pupils. Whereas if I were to provide them with it as a concrete example of if I have 4 blocks and I pick up another 2, I can add them together to find out how many blocks I have them all together. So when introducing the concept, it's important to provide a concrete example that children can understand. Let's look at another example. When introducing the concept of changing states of matter, I might say the following. Changing state of matter is the process of turning a solid into a liquid or gas, or vice versa, with the addition or removal of heat. Whilst this definition sounds clear without any concrete to connect it to the concept, it might still be abstract for some pupils and it might be difficult for them to understand. So I could support this explanation with a concrete example, such as, for example, ice is a solid, but if we take it out of the freezer and leave it at room temperature, it will melt and turn into a liquid. So this is going to support your pupils with their cognitive load and their understanding of concepts. It's really important to consider this when you are thinking of planning activities or introducing new information to your pupils. What I would like you to do now is to pause the video and start to think about how you are going to successfully present new information to the pupils based around the lesson that you are creating as part of your planning performer that you started in Seminar 1. There is some guidance here on the slide for you to support you around dual coding and concrete examples. And it's important for you to consider all aspects of that new information that you are trying to achieve based on the begin with the end objectives that you have already formulated. As you are doing this independently, you're not going to have the opportunity to go into breakout spaces and get some peer review. So please do take that to your next check-in and seek some support from your PDL. I hope that was a successful time in crafting your introduction to the lesson. Please don't be too frightened. I'm sure it will change several times before the end of the year, and or the end of Summer Institute, sorry. And we are here as PDLs to support you in making sure that that's as accurate and as good as an example of a lesson plan as possible. And it will be easier for you to do this once you've been into school, especially if you've got your employment school and can base it around some real life midterm plans. Let's move on then to activity 3 and the modelling of an I do. Again, in your self-directed study session on the importance of modelling, you explored the gradual release model. That is where we have an I do, a we do, and then a you do, where a teacher begins with an I do, supports pupils towards independent practice. So in this activity, we're going to focus on the I do stage of this process. To be a successful I do, it should meet the following criteria. Should introduce learning, demonstrate appropriate way of performing the skill or process that you are asking the children to acquire, clarify and exemplify specific steps, model the thinking process, and where relevant, use subject-specific language. So you can see here on the slide that we have got the I do, which is where the teacher is leading the learning, and then gradually releasing into the children and their independent practice. So let's analyse an example together. I'm now going to go into role and pretend that I am modelling to you. Difficult on a recording, but we'll try our best. The context is a lesson on using descriptive language in our own writing, and I'm going to model what I would expect from pupils in their writing. This is the I do stage. Okay, I know I always need to begin my sentence with a capital letter. So, capital T, the wolf. I could use an adjective to describe the wolf to make this more interesting. So what could I think of? I could have the scary wolf. How about the hungry wolf walked? That's not very effective. What could I use instead of walked? I want to make this a really interesting sentence. Okay, so I could change the hungry wolf walked to the hungry wolf crept. Where is he creeping? Towards Grandma's house. I'm just going to reread this and to check it makes sense. The hungry wolf crept towards Grandma's house. Great. Full stop. Excellent. Now, I've included an adjective and an interesting verb. Now I want to start my next sentence, maybe with an adverb. Okay. Quietly, he snuck up behind her and displayed his teeth. Okay, that sentence is missing an adjective. Let's see if I can add one, maybe to describe his teeth. Okay, so I could change that to he displayed his sharp teeth. That's much better. Okay, I'm going to reread this again now to check I'm making sense. The hungry wolf crept towards Grandma's house. Quietly, he snuck up behind her and displayed his sharp teeth. Okay, next sentence. I want to say he reached forward with his paws to grab her. I could use an adjective to describe his paws, and that would make my sentence sound and the wolf sound much more scary. They're quite big. What's a better word for big? Oh, massive. Okay, so he reached forwards with his massive paws. Okay, so stepping back out of roll. What I want you to think about, I want to pause the video, and what did you see that met the criteria for an I do? The criteria is on the screen there, so have a think about what did I do to try and meet that criteria. Welcome back. I hope you could see that I was explaining to the pupils at every stage. I was narrating my own thought process and demonstrating and exemplifying the way in which I was going to complete the writing task. I wasn't just writing the task, but I was explaining my thinking process so that they could think in a similar way when writing their own, such as I'm going to reread the sentence to check it makes sense. And I repeated that so that the pupils would follow that model when writing their own sentence. I also told them to look at a sentence and to see if it could be improved. Could I add an adverb or could I add an adjective? Now let's look at the planning for your do now. So it's now time for you to pause the recording again and spend some time scripting the I do for your lesson. This says to spend around 8 minutes, but as you are not working within the time constraints of the seminar, you can spend as long as you need to do on that. There's lots of things to consider: how you're going to introduce your new learning, what skill you want them to actually learn, are there specific steps that you could sequentially place into step form for the pupils to complete, and then how you're going to model and narrate your own thought process. Best of luck. Okay, welcome back. I hope you have found that time to plan your own I do useful. As I've already said, I know this is difficult as it's a recording, so please do reach out to your practice development lead to get some support, some colleague feedback on the work that you've done, as you've missed the opportunity to be in breakout spaces. I hope you feel you've had some experience of analysing those examples of both the begin with the end, introducing new concepts, and the modelling of an I do. Thank you very much for your time.